So today is election day in Canada, and I thought I couldn't miss this opportunity to jump in with a few comments. Now, they may not be what you're thinking. I'm not endeavoring to tell you who to vote for or even why you should vote for someone. What I wanted to talk about is something a little bit different. It has to do with communication. So the other week, I attended the Pierre Poilievre rally in Windsor, Ontario. And as he was speaking, I noticed his speech followed what seemed to be a formula. He seemed to divide his speech into separate sections based on a policy he was espousing. And then there was an emotional hook or story, a description of the policy and why it would help you as a citizen. And then based on all that, there was a call to action to support his party. Again, I'm not talking about who to vote for. I'm not talking about the election per se, or even the Trump effect on things. What I am interested is in that structure that he deployed as he was communicating his ideas. So when I got back from the event, this was going through my mind. So I sat down with my new best friend, ChatGPT, and I started to do some investigation. And I said, well, I basically explained what I just said to ChatGPT, and it came back with some interesting research for me. And ChatGPT actually kind of confirmed what I had been thinking. And what I found through the research was that there indeed is a strategy to Poilievre's speaking style. So first of all, he seemed to start every, first of all, I would say he broke his speech into policy sections. And then each of these policy sections had this formula applied to it, intentionally or not, but I think it was pretty darn intentional. So the first aspect was having an emotional hook or story. So he frequently begins by telling a personal story or a story that everyday people can connect with. And I'm going to share a little bit of that later on in my chat. Then, following that story or that hook, he would introduce a policy statement. What it is if he was elected, what he would do to change things for our benefit, which brought us into then a critique of the opposition, or in this case, the Liberal policies, and why he felt they were bad and how his policy would address the deficiencies he saw in the Liberals' policies. Then he would present his solution, the conservative solution, why he thought what they were doing would be better and beneficial, and tried to bring that home to me or the electorate in a way that resonated emotionally with them. So it hooked them with the story, introduced his policy concept, criticized the Liberal policy, and then explained his policy in more detail. Following that, he basically provided a call to action or a rallying cry as to why they should get out or why we should get out and vote for his party. I found it was very effective. It got me engaged into it. I'm a little bit more analytical than emotional, so I like to hear what it is that's being presented, but by bookending it with story and then call to action, I felt it was not only informational and interesting and got me thinking about the idea, but it also was emotional, and it was something that could get you rallied up to support. So I'm going to try to illustrate that. I'm going to take one of his famous speeches, the Canada First speech. Was delivered a few months ago. I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit and show you how that formula is there in that particular speech, and I think most of what I've seen him do, and then why I think that has been an effective approach as he's been on the campaign trail. So I'm entitling this Storytelling on the Political Trail, what business owners can learn from Pierre Poilievre. All right, so that's a bit of an excerpt from the Poilievre speech, or his Canada First speech. So you'll probably have noticed in his speech, he follows that structure I just talked about. There was that emotional hook. He begins with a lighthearted treatment about, he begins with a lighthearted comment about weather differences between Washington, D.C. and Ottawa, which helped to establish that relatable tone. Then he went to that policy introduction. He discusses national pride and the importance of Canadian sovereignty. There was a critique of the Liberal policies. He criticizes the Liberal government and their handling of national issues, suggesting a lack of focus on Canada's interests. Then there's the presentation of the conservative solutions. He advocates for policies that prioritize Canadian autonomy and economic strength. Now, in fairness, I think all the parties came around to that to a large degree near leading up to today's election. But in that earlier speech, he hit that pretty hard. And then that brought us to the rallying cry. He concludes with the slogan, Canada First, encapsulating his message and rallying supporters. The structured approach allows Poilievre to effectively communicate his policies while engaging his audience both emotionally and intellectually. So left brain and right brain. So let's break that down a little bit farther. Okay, so if you've heard anything that I've talked about over the last few years, one of the themes that kind of comes out in a pretty significant way is my priority of storytelling. I like the marketing that involves telling a story and grabbing people and bringing them into that story and causing them to see themselves in the story, and the solution that's offered is something that they can embrace, internalize both emotionally and rationally. So I often have talked about Don Miller and his story brand framework for storytelling in the commercial space. Don Miller's approach, the story brand framework, really has 7 elements to it. So by way of refresher, those 7 elements are first, number 1, defining the character. And in the case of the Canada First speech, the audience or the voter is the main character. Speech, although Poilievre is delivering the information, he's not the hero of the story. You and I are, the electorate. And so the hero is defined as the voter. Secondly, you define the problem. And the way Poilievre went about defining the problem was in a series of policy statements. So the problem when we're storytelling is that challenge, that hardship, that villain that's getting in the way of our hero or our character enjoying the success that they seek. Okay, let's start this section again. 1, 2, 3. All right, so just by way of quick review, the story brand framework has 7 distinct elements. The first is defining the character. The character or the hero is the person whose problem we're looking to solve through our products or services. Secondly, we define the character's problem. So this is the challenge or the pain point or the villain, as the case may be, that's standing in the way of our character or our hero realizing the success that they seek. The third element is the guide. The guide is you or me, the service provider. So the character is our customer. The guide is us, and we're wanting to define why we're the ideal guide or supplier for that customer or that character. Then we, as part of that, the fourth element is to provide our plan. How is it that we're going to go about and solve that problem with or for our hero? Then we have a call to action. The fifth element is call to action. This is where once we've caught their attention, we've explained why we're the right person to solve the problem and lay out the plan, we actually call them to take an action. That action is usually to pick up the phone and call us, to fill out a form, to buy online, any of these types of things that represent our primary call to action. There could be secondary call to action, so if we perceive that they're not quite ready to buy or commit to a conversation, then they may want to look up more information, look at our pricing, things like that. Those would be transitional or secondary calls to action. Then that brings us to the sixth element, and that is our attempt to show what we're doing and how it will help them avoid failure. None of us want to fail, especially if we're in a position to make decisions for our companies. We want to help our hero make a great decision and avoid failure and end the seventh element, ending in success, and defining or creating a picture of what it means to end in success. So those seven elements, the character, the problem, the guide, the plan, the call to action, what it means to avoid failure, and what it means to end in success. So how does Polyev, in his speeches and his rallies, take those seven storytelling elements and apply them to his goal of becoming the next prime minister? Well, he does it this way. First, defining the character. Okay, so how does Pierre Polyev mirror the story brand framework? Now, first of all, I'm not saying that he's intentionally using Don Miller's story brand framework. But as I listen to his speeches and his rallies, I see those elements reflected in what he's doing. So the first thing is the character. In the case of Pierre Polyev, he's talking directly about Canadians. Who are those Canadians? Struggling homeowners, workers, parents, farmers. He frames them as the real hero of his story. Secondly, he defines the problems. He clearly defines villains, that's for sure. Typically, it's the Liberal government and big bureaucracy and red tape, inflation, etc. Each of those things are the problem that's standing in the way of the Canadian hero realizing what they really want out of their government. Then he defines the guide, and of course, that's him. Pierre positions himself as the trusted guide, or the one that's going to help the hero of the story realize what it is they want. So he does that by showing empathy. You hear him talking about his own experience, his own family's experience, his wife Anna's experience. I hear you. I get it. And he offers his credibility. I have a plan. I have experience. When I was doing this previously, etc. So he positions himself and his leadership in the Conservative Party as the guide that character really needs to work with to realize a solution to the electorate's problem. Then he lays out a plan. And as I mentioned in my intro, he does that by taking each of his policy areas and he lays out a simple, understandable plan. The 5 gatekeepers. He build homes, not bureaucracy. Cap spending to lower inflation. So he's very clear, very simple as he's laying out his plan. Once he does that, in every element of the speech is policy 1, here's the problem, here's what we're going to do to solve it, and then there's a call to action. His speeches, in fact, each element of his speech ends in a rallying cry. Bring it home. Vote Conservative. Very clear direction as to what he wants. And what he wants is your vote. So each policy area, problem area is addressed in this pattern. He also doesn't omit talking about avoiding failure. He paints vivid negative scenarios if people don't vote for him. The worsening cost of living, lost freedoms, lost opportunities, losing to the U.S., worsening crime, etc. He's very clearly painting what it means to fail and presenting the need to avoid that failure. And it equally is showing what ending in success looks like. He offers hope, a Canada that's freer, Canada that's safer, healthier, and where you control your own life. And if those are values that are important to you, the idea is that you're obviously going to select and support him to answer the problems that you're experiencing in your life. So why does this approach work so well? And I guess tonight we're going to find out if it worked ultimately well or not, but as a model, it certainly offers us some great insights. So the first thing is his approach is emotionally resonant. StoryBrand always emphasizes feeling, and Polyev's storytelling approach certainly taps into our emotions and how we feel about uh, the problem that we're facing, the government that's currently in place, etc. Very emotional. Secondly, it's simple and clear next steps. So the as he so, and does it in both a rational and an emotional way. He makes it very clear what has to happen for us to realize those benefits. In this case, there's no complicated policies and there's no complicated calls to action. It's straightforward, it's simple, and tonight is the opportunity to exercise that, to vote for him or someone else. Definitely, there was a lot of energy in the room. And one of the reasons he was able to generate that was that his approach was audience focused. It was never about him, except for his desire to be part of the problem, be part of the except for his desire to be part of the solution. It was always about empowering the audience, empowering the electorate, helping the hero of the story achieve what it was that they were wanting to experience. And then he used repeating story loops. And this is the part that really stood out to me, is where we have those 7 elements: the character, problem, guide, plan, call to action, avoiding failure, and ending in success. It was repeated around each of the policy elements. And so people were into a groove, into a movement, so to speak. So in short, I would say Polyev is basically a live action story brand funnel every time he gives a speech. He frames the voter as the hero, defines villains, guides them with a plan, warns of danger, and paints a better future over and over for each policy issue. So I would suggest, as a business person, as a marketer, someone who's trying to communicate their ideas to a constituency, that perhaps take a look at the political leaders, especially during this election time period, and see how they've painted their story and how they've endeavored to draw in their audience, the people they want to capture, and to communicate in a way that uses storytelling effectively to communicate their message. And then think about how you can do the similar thing with your brand, your product, your service, to enlarge your audience, to improve your visibility and story branding, and how to drive more business and opportunity for your organization. It's going to be exciting to see who pulls off a victory tonight, and think about what it may have been in their communication style that contributed to that victory. Until next time, I'm the Big Kahuna, Lauren Shawns.